Ladies and gentlemen, in the comment section of Matthew Sands, NAP, Voluntaryism, Anarcho-Cap Nonsense. That's the title of the video that I'm reading the comment section of right now. Matthew Sands says, thank you for the response. First of all, let me skip to the next paragraph, that's just introductory. You seemed to be saying that my first sentence is stupid because such standards need to be set in law. Yes, I'm saying you need law. So why don't you just give up on this anarchist bullshit and just have a law? He says, but as you later admit, I propose doing precisely that through a peace agreement. Now, is this peace agreement a law or not? What is it? Is it a law or is it an agreement? Make up your mind. If it's a law, then find a government to pass it and enforce it. Because that's what a law is. That requirement is clearly not lost on me. So he recognizes he needs to make it a law. In fact, it is part of why I assert that the non-aggression principle needs to be established as law. I thought laws were aggression. I thought that was the whole point of anarchy. Is this guy a troll? Are you a frickin' troll? Are you trolling me? Are you trolling me? This is a sophisticated troll project if you're trolling me. What did he just say there? The non-aggression principle needs to be established as law. Really? I thought law was against anarchists. So he wants to have a law. Okay. Is he a sophisticated troll or a base moron? He says it needs to be established as a law rather than just being some floaty principle that different people interpret differently. Well, different people are going to interpret stuff differently. Let me promise you that. And that's why we have to have courts and judges and juries and lawyers. But continuing, he says, just to jump ahead to your comments about this peace agreement. Ruling people is a violation of the NAP, as it involves the threat of force. So we can't rule over people. All right. What does ruling over people mean? Whatever, you just can't do it. It's a no-no. Bad, bad, bad. Don't rule over other people. So, the NAP cannot be established as a universal law through a ruling authority, like a government. It can only be established as a law through a peace agreement. So, a peace agreement is a magical thing that will allow the non-aggression principle to be established as universal law under a ruling authority. So the NAP cannot be established as universal law through not under a ruling authority. So there's no ruling authority. Alright, so a peace agreement is a magical thing that allows the non-aggression principle to be established as universal law. Alright, but it doesn't involve the threat of force. This is junk. This is garbage. Alright, but let's go. Continuing. Law is basically the terms of peace. Law is basically the terms of peace. Well, if that's your understanding of law, then you're a moron. Law is extremely sophisticated, and we have to write it down and argue about it every goddamn day in our courts. And it changes constantly. Every time a new technology comes, it changes, and every time people invent new behaviors, it changes. Law changes constantly. You have to have a backbone of principles and an understanding of philosophy in order to build your law system. We don't rewrite the Constitution every day. We don't form a new government every day. But we do write new laws every day. These things are not set in stone. And once you write them, they are set in stone until you change them. But you have to have principles to go on. That is what law is. He says law is basically the terms of peace. Well, what the hell are terms of peace? What is peace? Peace is what happens when nobody's fighting. What does that mean? That's a stupid sentence. That's the stupidest sentence I've ever heard in my life. Law is basically the terms of peace. That is officially the stupidest sentence I have ever heard. Usually, it is set by the ruling authority, the terms of peace, right? No. Usually the law is set by the ruling authority. Terms of peace, by the way, are what we offer to people at the end of a war. Okay. Usually law is set by the ruling authority, like a government or a monarch, that base the law on their authority to rule others. No, they base the law on whatever they damn choose. They base it on whim. Their authority is based on their authority to rule others. What? Nothing's based on their authority to rule others. That's a nonsense sentence. Okay, next sentence. This idea is to establish the non-aggression principle as the universal terms of peace. Now he's invented this new idea of terms of peace. Why does he use the word terms of peace? Because it gets him away from the word law. Now they're basically the same thing, he says in this sentence. Law is basically the terms of peace. They're the same thing, but at least he doesn't have to use the word law anymore, which is a dirty word. Okay, so this idea is to establish the non-aggression principle as the law through a peace agreement. To establish it as the terms of peace through a peace agreement. But law. To establish it as a law through the peace agreement. Now, the way that we pass laws right now is we have elected officials who vote on it. So you're going to do it by voting through the populace or something, I assume. Okay, fine. Through a peace agreement where no one has the right to rule, because ruling people would be illegal. Now remember, don't rule anybody. Now what if somebody decides they want to rule others? Who's going to stop them? Who's the ruler that's going to stop them? What if someone decides they want to rule over other people? Oh, that's a no-no. You mustn't do it. Who's going to stop them? The police? Who is going to stop somebody who decides they want to rule over other people? Who's going to stop them? Did they just agree? Everybody agrees. All right, let's see. It would be the capitalized terms of peace. Now remember, terms of peace means law. So the non-aggression principle would be the law. And it would apply to everyone, regardless of their agreement. All right, well, if you're just going to enlist everyone regardless of their agreement, then why the fuck don't you just use the system we have right now, which already enlists everyone regardless of their agreement? So you're offering no substitution and no difference from the current system we have. You're such a moron. Continuing, just as it doesn't matter if a rapist agrees to the law against rape, the law still applies to them. All right. So you're defining an objective law you're going to apply to and enforce on everyone whether they agree or not. That's what you just said right there. So with regards to how many need to agree to this peace agreement, I can't say an exact number. Well, you just said nobody needs to agree to it. You just said it doesn't matter whether they agree to it. You're going to enforce it no matter what. That's what you just said in the previous sentence. And the very next sentence, you don't say you're not sure how many people need to agree. And in the previous sentence, you said it doesn't matter if they agree. You're going to enforce it on them, whether they agree or not. And then you said you're not sure how many need to agree. Make up your mind. How many do you think would need to be on board with such an agreement to actually overthrow the current ruling authorities and replace their rule with this universal principle? I think you're a moron who's about 3 inches away from being charged with treason by the FBI, which is on a hair trigger nowadays. That's what I think. However many it takes is what I'm aiming for. All right, well, call up those guys that bombed Oklahoma City and see if you can make some friends with them. I think we executed them, so be careful. One final clarification on the peace agreement, which is worth knowing. I know I've written a lot already. Fine. It is a 3-part peace agreement which goes like this. Part 1, the basic agreement to make the NAP the law. So first of all, we enforce the non-aggression principle on everybody, whether they like it or not. Part 2, lines in the sand to set limits of tolerance over differing interpretations. So that's where we battle out. That's where we have the anarchic wars of formation, where we battle out who rules over who. And number 3, rightful ownership. Basically, ratifying rightful ownership through the NAP. So then once the wars have ended, then whoever has grabbed whatever territory and they have solidified their control over that territory, that's their territory. Alright, brilliant system. Sounds like anarchy to me. Part 2 is designed to address the issues you alluded to when you spoke about the legalese requirement of establishing boundaries for identifying threats and attempts. Yeah, it says to set limits of tolerance over differing interpretations. What if my limits of tolerance are really low or really high, and I just don't tolerate your shit at all? What are you gonna do? Yeah, you're talking about just total war here. You just talk about total war. Okay, just as both murder and attempted murder are crimes, initiation of force and attempt to initiation of force, same goes for threats. It's not as subjective as you feel threatened. Alright, so for the threats, let's go over that for a second here. It's not as subjective as you feel. So you can't just say, I feel threatened, therefore I'm going to retaliate. He says it has to be they are literally threatening you. So it can't be figurative, it can't be metaphorical, it can't be an analogy, it has to literally be a threat. So I don't, as the victim, as the person being threatened, I don't get to interpret that. He gets to interpret it. Okay? Now, why does he get to interpret it? Because he wants everyone to be free. Alright. So he is interpreting for me, the victim, what a threat is. So he says, for example, having a gun is not a threat. Okay? Now, what if your gun is really big? What if it's a huge gun? What if it shoots a lot of bullets? What if it could kill 1,000 people with one shot? Does an individual really need to be able to protect themselves from 1,000 people attacking them? I mean, if it's that bad, he really ought to call the police, I think. So I don't think that really big guns that could kill 1,000 people in one shot are really reasonable guns for humans, for individuals to have. Armies need to have them, sure, but not individuals. So he says having a gun is not a threat. Well, you're clearly wrong. Having a gun is a threat. He says even if you personally find it threatening. So he will decide for me, he says, it's not a threat even if you think it is. Well, good. I'm glad we put that to bed real soundly there. He says, but pointing it at someone or saying you're going to shoot them is a threat. So as long as you don't point it, that's okay. So people could walk around with guns on them and that would be okay. They just can't point it anyway. Alright, well that's some pretty solid law you've got there. Alright, just write that all down, and then once that hits the courts and people were obeying your law to the letter, except there turned out to be a problem, then you'll just have to face that in the courts, I guess. Oh wait, you're not going to have courts, you're just going to set down a law. Right, okay. Anyway, sorry for writing so much, but I wanted to address your points thoroughly. Well, you certainly did that. I hope that I addressed your points thoroughly. Now, what are you, 15 years old? How old are you, kid? Jesus.